We are just hours away to Malaysia's 15th general election, and campaigning is in full swing across the country, with tough battles expected for those ballots. And in the midst of all that action is CNA's Lot Wei Su, now standing by for us in the capital, Kuala Lumpur. Wei Su, it's over to you.
And thank you, Dawn. Well, as candidates make their last-ditch efforts to win votes, there's no shortage of issues and concerns on the minds of voters. Teresa Tang tells us some of the key ones.
As Malaysians get ready to vote, key issues could influence how they cast their ballots. Let's take a look at what some of these are in this general election. When the Barisan Nasional coalition tumbled in the last nationwide poll in 2018, Malaysians resoundingly said no to corruption. Then Prime Minister Najib Razak was ousted from power over his involvement in the 1MDB scandal, in a defeat that ended decades of BN rule. Najib was convicted of abuse of power, criminal breach of trust, and money laundering in 2020 in a case linked to 1MDB. He's now serving a 12-year jail term and compelled to pay $47 million in fines. The head of Malaysia's largest political party, UMNO, is also facing multiple graft charges. Ahmad Zahid Hamidi was acquitted in September of charges he received bribes involving a foreign visa system, but he still faces some 47 charges he misused funds for a charity he founded. Despite the headway made in prosecuting graft at the highest levels, there remains a general lack of trust and confidence in the upper echelons of power. This has been compounded by infighting that has seen the country's leadership change twice since the 2018 vote. But the top concern among voters heading into these polls: rising inflation, worsened by the war in Ukraine. It threatens Malaysia's recovery from the pandemic. Prices of food, fuel, and other necessities have gone up, while the ringgit is under pressure. The government's special Jihad on Addressing Inflation team has introduced subsidies for food, fuel, and wages, cushioning the blow and keeping workers employed. But voters want assurances that the next government can ably tackle the problem, which could last for some time. Well, beyond inflation, there's the wider worry about the trajectory of the economy's recovery, especially among 5.8 million new and younger voters, after election laws were changed in 2019. For them, bread and butter issues are key, including the availability and security of jobs, support for businesses, affordable housing, and quality education. They're also keen to see younger faces in Parliament, people who are not shackled by the past and can better represent their needs and aspirations. No doubt, there are a multitude of other issues that could sway how votes are cast, including race, party politics, and the country's response to the pandemic. But for the more than 21 million eligible voters in Malaysia, the core expectation of any good government is to better the lives of people. To achieve this, there's recognition that any government in power must successfully navigate the choppy waters ahead while upholding the moral compass, continuing the fight against corruption.
Malaysia's political parties are fielding many new faces in this general election, hoping that fresh blood will give them an edge at tomorrow's polls. Many parties also want to attract young voters, with 41% of the electorate aged between 18 and 40. Pamela Lim with this report.
Unfazed about walking into a lion's den, Dr. Muhammad Faiz has been fielded by Perikatan Nasional in Bagan Dato, Perak. It's a tall order as he goes up against UMNO President Ahmad Zahid Hamidi, who's had a tight grip on the seat since 1995. But Dr. Faiz believes that the constituency needs a breath of fresh air.
It can be an opportunity for me as a young face, a new face, and also from a professional background to prove myself against what we call giants in politics. It is time for a new generation, a new type of leader.
Ahmad Zahid somewhat agrees with its opponent. The Barisan Nasional chairman chose to give his coalition a makeover for GE15. Several veteran politicians were dropped, and fresh faces make up about 85% of BN's candidates.
Pada kali ini, kita berhasrat untuk mewajahkan semula Barisan Nasional dengan turut mengemukakan ramai muka-muka baru. Kombinasi antara yang berpengalaman dengan muka-muka baru ini adalah bagi mewujudkan kesinambungan bagi Barisan Nasional untuk terus bergerak membentuk sebuah kerajaan.
Political parties all round have fielded more new faces and younger candidates, particularly to attract some 5 million first-time voters, which include youths aged 18 to 20. But not all are convinced.
They sometimes capitalize on the idea of, I'm a youth, so therefore you should vote for me. But I'm not that inclined to vote for them, firstly because I don't think they are politically experienced.
Kalau saya kawan-kawan sama pendapat kan. Masalah dia dulu dia pernah rasa lah kan, ni dulu macam ni okey, yang dulu dia cakap. Jadi kena pilih yang terbalik lah dia cakap.
Meanwhile, analysts say the fate of these new faces depends on the turnout of loyal party supporters.
Some constituencies are already seen as safe seats. Voters will still back the party because these are hardcore party voters. So regardless of the candidates, in some constituencies, the party could still win.
With a record number of 945 candidates vying for 222 parliamentary seats, Malaysians will be spoilt for choice come polling day. And split votes in multi-corner fights may just result in a few surprises, including new faces eventually making their parliamentary debut.
And James Chai joins us now. He's visiting fellow of a Malaysian Studies Programme at ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute. I just heard that report. Now, we may have surprises in new faces in Parliament, but even before we get there, you are already surprised. If you think about it, nomination day, 5th of November, 13 days ago, your comment then was Barisan Nasional can look forward to an expected handsome victory. For Pakatan Harapan, you said likely to face an expected washout. 13 days from that point, do you still stand by this assessment?
So, when I made that assessment, Barisan Nasional came from a point of an extreme high. So they had consecutive victories of by-elections and state elections. And the recent two state elections were landslide victories that hasn't happened before. And in contrast, Pakatan Harapan was having a tough time even retaining half of their seats. PKR, the leader of Pakatan Harapan, managed to only have one seat in the previous state election. So that was everyone's expectation. But recent polls have shown that the opposite is actually happening, which means that we see a reversal of fortunes. Pakatan Harapan now from the underdog to the favourites, and Barisan Nasional from the favourites now to the close third place. So I attributed a lot of it to how the campaigns were run. So there were a lot of issues of clear leadership that was present in Pakatan that wasn't present in Barisan Nasional. Extremely well-organized grassroots machinery that we have seen, idealism stoked up from volunteers for Pakatan and paid volunteers running away from Barisan Nasional campaigns. And lastly, a very consistent message from Pakatan Harapan of addressing bread and butter issues, attacking the opponent's weakness, which is on corruption, centering Zahid Hamidi. Those had yielded immense dividends because now you're seeing a wave of individuals and voters returning to Pakatan Harapan and seeing that they will turn out to vote
but,
for them.
However, it's just 13 days. They did not say, I've discovered a mountain of gold. I have now this wonderful plan that will lift us out of these many problems that we face. It was, as you say, tough, well-organized, focused campaigning and messaging. But you see, you look at Barisan Nasional, conveniently 3 days before the dissolution of Parliament, they released their budget for 2023 and went on to say, this budget, if you vote us in, it's already approved, we will retable it, you will get the subsidies to 70% of the population, including direct cash handouts. How can you compete with that? What kind of political messaging can in any way try to compete with the sheer fact that here's money, it's for you, vote me in?
Yeah. So this is the first election whereby voters would get an assessment of 3 different governments in one term. So due to the fact that many maneuverings happened and there were many changes in government without going through the ballot box, suddenly voters for the very first time, they're not assessing just one government against many oppositions, they're assessing 3 governments. So what I think voters came to realize is that it is not sufficient for them to address, to have promises that are being put out by coalitions. They are looking at things more holistically as your ability to deliver, as well as the character of the team and the leadership that you have. And that's why Barisan Nasional, although they have a very strong budget that gives out a lot of subsidies and goodies, manifesto making extremely bold promises like free education, free laptops, assistive basic income and so on. All of these things actually didn't feature prominently in the campaigns at all, because I think if the government that's promising you something is also the government that's currently governing at the worst inflationary period, the promises ring hollow. So suddenly the assessment is, can I really trust that you're a credible team of people who would deliver on those promises? And suddenly the assessment is more in favor of the previous 2 governments that had delivered well.
But until these last few weeks, the judgment on Pakatan Harapan's 22 months in power was less than ideal. Let's face it, people felt disappointed, disenchanted, you name it, they felt it. They felt they had not delivered. But you feel that verdict is now reversed?
Yeah, I do think that there is something to be said about how proximate voters are to that government in time. So it is true, if you wind back to Pakatan Harapan's 22 months of government, you would see approval ratings dropping from 76% to a low 30% before they were swept out of power. But what happened after that was also very interesting, was that the second government that came into power, led by Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, his government actually went through a terrible COVID crisis that was really not within their control, but it brings very dark and bitter memories where people were putting out white flags, pleading for help, given how desperate the situation is. And then after that, you have Ismail Sabri, who thought that he could have governed in a post-COVID economic recovery period, but it turned out to be a period that was ridden with inflation as well as many natural disasters, and makes it very difficult for people to remember that as a good time. And I think, therefore, by virtue of timing, people had softened their approach to governments that are way before that compared to the governments more proximate. And I think that had an impact in how people assess them.
All right, thank you for that very lengthy and comprehensive and a good assessment. Thanks so much indeed. James Chai, Visiting Fellow from Malaysian Studies Programme, ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute. Thanks so much, Mr. Chai.